My name is Mark, this is Zen Talk, and the topic is mind training. So what is the point of mind training? Why do we do it at all? The Tibetans call mind training lojong, and it is the practice involving the refining and purifying of one's motives and attitudes. Actually, in fact, they have a recitation of about 59 slogans that the initiate will memorize and will recite back. And these are slogans or sayings that kind of refine and help one with the right attitudes towards the Buddhist studies. In Zen, there is a similar practice of lojong, and that is the recitation of the Heart Sutra, which in a sense captures the essence of lojong. And it's not necessarily 59 slogans, but it is a very nice poem that pretty much has the heart and soul of Zen in it. And this is recited every day by the very faithful, of course. So this is a process where reciting the slogans or reciting the Heart Sutra builds up within one's mind the motivations and the correct attitudes, but it kind of gives basic framework of the metaphysics and the philosophy that you need in order to pursue your Buddha studies. So the purpose is to shape the mind of the student, to prepare them for the Buddha Dharma and the process of becoming Buddha. So sometimes Zen training is known as spiritual bootcamp. In a way, the mind training can be equivalent to the military bootcamp, in where the recruit is given basic instruction on how to dress and, attire themselves, like the uniforms and for what occasions. Code of conduct, which is mostly interacting with the chain of command. The basics of military operations, which would be unit tactics and combat training. And the encouragement and motivation. And in the military, basically, it's to stay alive and help others. So that is what I would say would be the basics of the military training. However, in Zen, especially in Japanese Zen, the candidates go through what's known as a year of hell, which is what my friend Martin went through when he was in the Japanese Rinzai monasteries. So a year of hell is essentially the basic training that the Zen priests go through, and where they live in a training temple, and everything they do, everything about them is stripped away. They are reshaped and reformed to become the Zen priest. Japanese Zen, by far, is the most militaristic of the Buddha schools. Mind training, though, is found in all the Buddha schools for the initiates, though it is not as formal or militaristic as the Japanese Zen is. So when we look at mind training in general, there are two distinct types. There's the formal, which is mostly for the initial training. This is like the, taking the recruit and then they go through the boot camp. But this is only for a short time, from anywhere from 3 months to 1 year. Then you have the informal training, which is done pretty much after some sort of formal training. Then you go to informal, which is lifelong. So formal training is often the first year of the initiate's life within the organization or the path that is being presented to them. And then after that, the informal training with a master or senior students or other people that have gone through formal training. And these are usually the student finds these teachers who meet the student's disposition and temperament. Sometimes, people, they get involved with a teacher and they think that that's their teacher for life. And that is generally a mistake. And you'll find that most serious practitioners and serious seekers will usually go to a teacher that meets them, or they find a teacher that they can really connect with, not necessarily the first person that they met. This comes back to the old joke of the guy who married the first girl that he dated. And unfortunately, we see this within the Western Zen. People kind of stick with the very first Zen center or the very first teacher that they met. Okay, so why is this necessary? Why even bother with mind training? What's it about? So it is kind of said that most people are like cats. Their minds wander here and there, picking up all kinds of stray ideas and beliefs that mostly are hindrances and self-defeating. And a lot of times these beliefs and these ideas that they have create a whole lot of suffering. Mind training is the process to strip away all the junk thinking and defeated beliefs. And these are the beliefs that only create suffering, mostly for oneself. And also to bring out the bodhisattva nature in the student to strive towards Buddhahood. And this is the most important, where we are bringing out your inner desire to seek enlightenment and become Buddha. So let's talk about mind training in the West. So there really is mind training. We've had it for, a very, very long time. So in Western culture, we call spiritual mind training seminary school. And you will find these all over the place if you really look for it. This method also follows the formal and informal style of teaching, similar to the Japanese Zen temples, in where the seminarian is taught the proper code and behavior, how to properly dress and present oneself, and the basics of the faith, and how to motivate the people they minister to remain faithful. And examples of seminary schools in the West would be like the University of Notre Dame, Yale Divinity School, and Harvard Divinity School, which absolutely does have Buddha studies. So are there exceptions? Does everybody have to go through mind training? Well, there are those sentient beings whose minds are awakened to the true nature of reality through their life experiences and, of course, good karma and rebirth. This would be like the story of Hunang, the sixth patriarch, who woke up just by hearing the Diamond Sutra, spoken out loud by a traveling monk. So not everybody needs mind training. And in the military, it's kind of funny when there's a thing known as direct commission, in where a recruit who's going directly to be an officer doesn't go to West Point or any of the military colleges, or even through ROTC. What's known as they go to what's called Fork and Knife School, and where they are just taught basically how to wear the uniform and eat in the officer's dining room, and that's it. So if a sentient being whose already mind is awakened and somehow finds themselves within any of these religious organizations, generally what tends to happen is they're just shown the very basics of the form and the very basics of the customs, and then they're pretty much left to themselves, which is kind of what happened to the Zen sixth patriarch. The fifth patriarch already noticed that Hunang was already quite awakened and enlightened himself, and just put him into the kitchen as a rice pounder. And there's a lot of stories of Hunang on the internet, on YouTube, that you can go research for yourself, and it's kind of humorous about what happened to him. But he wasn't given any training at all, because you can't train an awakened mind. You could only learn from it. Let's talk about some pitfalls and errors that happens within the mind training. So the first one is that the mind training is often mistaken as the practice, and the real practice of Buddhism is lost. And you'll see this all the time, where people will start referring to the mind training as the practice. And what the real practice of the Buddha teaches in the sutras is not really seen. The next one is the Bootcamp forever mistake. This is where organizations, and particularly a lot of Western Zen centers, they understand Bootcamp. They got that down. They understand the initial training, but they don't have anything after that. They've never developed an informal training system. They've never move the students out of the boot camp. And there might be some reasons for this, and I'll get into this in a bit. There becomes a codependent students and teacher worship, where the students they feel that they can't practice without the teacher, and they kind of start worshiping the teacher as an enlightened being, as as equal or as the Buddha. And so there's kind of this codependent issue going on here, which some teachers recognize, some teachers don't see it. Then next, it would be in tangent to that is the teacher becomes attached to the students, and of course of being teacher. And this kind of goes back to this Bootcamp Forever model, and where because the teacher becomes attached to the students for their own ego or their sense of being teacher, and of course for the financial reasons, because people got to pay to go to boot camp, the teacher won't let them go. The teacher won't let them move on. So, and that also then comes into the no informal training or undeveloped informal training. And this goes back to the teacher won't allow the informal training to naturally arise, which is absolutely, in my opinion, a terrible thing to happen, but it happens. So a lot of times there's also a lack of stated purpose for the mind training. The teachers are unclear as to what they are doing. So that sometimes the teachers are just doing unto others what was done to them, which is a classic sign of a cult, by the way. And then there's also the very fine line between mind training and mind conditioning, which would be the brainwashing. All right, so how would I go about mind training? If I was to run a mind training school for Zen, well, first I would prepare for the mind training. I would have the student ground one's mind in the basics of our metaphysics and core beliefs. So in Zen, like I said, we use the Heart Sutra. And when I was beginning the Zen practice, the very first thing that we would do after a brief period of silent meditation, which I wouldn't say we did Zazen. It was more just calming our minds. 20 minutes of serene meditation, calming our minds, centering ourselves. Then we would recite the Heart Sutra, which, like I was saying earlier, is the very basic framework of the Zen metaphysics and the core beliefs, and especially for those who are on the Bodhisattva path. So this recitation and kind of this grounding it in one's mind is really taking the Heart Sutra to the core of your beliefs is absolutely necessary. For it gives you that from that point forward, it really helps with understanding what you're going to be taught and understanding what is being said from that point forward. All right, so then the next thing I would probably do is set up some sort of like boot camp, a 3-month up to 1 year intensive formal training. And this would lead to a priest-graduation ceremony. I would not have the students hanging or I would definitely not have Bootcamp Forever. That would be a huge mistake. So like I said, 3 months up to 1 year, you would really have to just sort of, this all depends on, what you can set up and of course who the students are. But this would be, informal training is, like I said, it's like a boot camp, where there is ritual, there is custom and form, there are uniforms, you're stripping away all the junk thinking, all of the everyday life, and you're becoming the Zen priest. You're reshaping yourself, and you absolutely have to have a graduation ceremony. There has to be a closing. You just can't have it unended and going on forever, because then at that point you're running a cult if you do that. So then I would have after the priest graduates from formal training, they would go into informal training. And the student would find a teacher, a senior priest, to study with, and that would be an informal study. And this could be, in some seminaries, the priest would go to a church or to a location, and there would be senior priests that they would learn from or that they would help with. But it's a long-term, informal study style. And this in Zen, you would have the same thing. You would have the students going to finding a teacher, a senior priest, and this is not the teacher that was from Bootcamp. Who cares about that? This is somebody that they connect with. They find this person and they really connect with them. So then after about 5 years of informal training, the graduate, the person would be invited to help with formal and informal training. And you'll see this also within Japanese Zen Buddhism, that after about 5 years of informal training, the person would be considered a senior priest, and they can come back and they can help with other things. So this would absolutely not be a cult. There's nothing here that would be culty-like. So the training is not to make enlightened beings. Rather, it is the purpose to grow the pool of bodhisattvas who will encourage others and help others become bodhisattvas. So as a conclusion, mind training is critical for the unawakened initiates. However, a balance between the formal and informal training must occur for growth and maturing of the student. Awakened minds that come to the church, that would be your Zen center, can be taught the ecclesiastical ways. However, those ways are not the enlightenment itself. Many who go through the mind training expect to be enlightened, and when they aren't, tend to double down on the training as if it were to speed up things. It won't happen, and it doesn't work that way. And there's an old Zen joke which says, a student went to the temple and asked how long would it take him to gain enlightenment if he joined the temple. And so 10 years, says the Zen master. Then the student replies, well, how about if I really work hard and double my effort? In that case, says the Zen master, 20 years. Okay, well, thank you for listening to my presentation. Please remember to like and subscribe.